In the previous video, you saw that in chapter 13, verse 11, another beast arises in Jerusalem. And that the term beast does not refer to a single person, but to a monarchy, with a succession of rulers. And you saw in verse 12, that this eastern monarchy would exercise the authority of the first beast, or monarchy. Or in other words, it would be a subordinate monarchy. In verse 13, you saw this eastern religious authority would be responsible for the production of a fraudulent miracle that involved the claim of fire from heaven. In verse 14, you saw that John exposes this miracle as a fraud, and explains it will be used to seduce the people of Jerusalem into icon worship. In verse 15, you saw that this eastern monarch would attribute a spirit to the icon, and that it would show signs of life, to the extent that people would even hear it speak to them. And that this icon worship would be codified into the empire's law. In verse 16, John prophesies that the people would be given a mark on their forehead or right forehand. And that this mark is a mark and nothing else, precisely as the text describes. And it is placed on the surface of the skin. And that it was taken prophetically from the marking of the Azazel goat on the Day of Atonement. It is neither a microchip, nor an RFID implant, nor a vaccination. And in verse 17, John prophesies that religious law, requiring submission to the beast, or monarchy, would be imposed, to the extent of governing economic activity, in the empire. And in verse 18, John says that the number is 666, and this number is to be enumerated, which means to specify as on a list, one after another, first, second and third. As in 6 first, 6 second and 6 third, which is 6-3, or, as is commonly known, 666. And that this is a prophecy of a succession of 3 monarchs, all named 6. The last one being the third 6, or 666. John's prophecies are so detailed and specific. If all this were just made up, or invented, there is simply no way all these details could exist and perfectly match his descriptions, given centuries before the events occur. But as you are about to see, they actually do. In verse 11, John introduces his prophecy concerning the second beast. We have already mentioned that the term, beast, is not a derogatory term, concerning one individual alone, as is routinely presented by counter-reformationist preachers. It is a term that is used to describe by Daniel, and then subsequently by John, to prophesy Gentile monarchies, and their kingdoms. To understand John's prophecy, beginning in verse 11, a little background in history is also important. Because if you see John's prophecies from the historical perspective, rather than the counter-reformationist obfuscations of preterism, or premillennial rapturism, then John's prophecies will be immediately visible and obvious. The identity of the second beast is without any ambiguity at all, in history. Thus the desperate need to obfuscate it, by counter-reformationists. As you will recall, in the first prophecy, John begins the description of his vision, standing on the shore of the island of Patmos, staring across the sea, in the direction of the city of Ephesus. And as you also recall in the first videos in the series pointed out, John's prophecy concerning the use of the term Antichrist, was that there were many Antichrists in Ephesus already, but the Antichrist which headed up the entire movement, would come to the city of Ephesus. And the Ephesian believers were to be expecting and looking out for his eventual arrival to their city. To understand the amazing accuracy and specificity of John's prophecy, you have to understand the historic development of what historians refer to as Nicene Christianity. But what John had called the Nicolaitans in the book of Revelation. The article entitled Patriarchate in Wikipedia explains, quote, Patriarchate is an ecclesiological term in Christianity, designating the office and jurisdiction of an ecclesiastical patriarch. 3 patriarchates were established as apostolic sees in the 1st century, Rome, Antioch, and Alexandria. Added to these were Constantinople in the 4th century, and Jerusalem in the 5th century. Eventually, together, these 5 were recognized as the Pentarchy by the Council of Ephesus in 431. 5 ancient patriarchates of the Pentarchy, headed by patriarchs as the highest-ranking bishops in the Christian Church prior to the Great Schism, were the Patriarchates of Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. The East-West Schism of 1054 split the Latin Rite See of Rome from the four Byzantine Rite Patriarchates of the East, thus forming distinct Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. End quote. The article goes on to explain, quote, 9 of the current autocephalous Eastern Orthodox churches, including the four ancient churches of Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch and Jerusalem mentioned above, are organized as patriarchates. In chronological order of establishment, the other 5 are: Bulgarian Patriarchate, the oldest one following the Pentarchy, Georgian Patriarchate, Serbian Patriarchate, Russian Patriarchate and Romanian Patriarchate. The Eastern Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch moved its headquarters to Damascus in the 13th century, during the reign of the Egyptian Mamelukes, conquerors of Syria. A Christian community had flourished in Damascus since apostolic times. However, the Patriarchate is still called the Patriarchate of Antioch. End quote. So you see, this is all traced back to the religious origins of the Nicolaitan movement, in the city of Antioch, Syria. The Encyclopedia Britannica, on its article entitled, Patriarch, states the following quote, the biblical appellation patriarch appeared occasionally in the 4th century to designate prominent Christian bishops. By the end of the 5th century, however, in the course of growing ecclesiastical centralization, it acquired a specific sense. After the Council of Nicaea in 325, the church structure was patterned on the administrative divisions of the Roman Empire. Thus, each civil province was headed by a metropolitan, or bishop of the metropolis, the civil capital of the province, while larger administrative units, called dioceses, were presided over by an exarch of the diocese, a title gradually replaced by patriarch. Some patriarchs exercised authority over several dioceses, the Bishop of Rome over the entire West, the Bishop of Alexandria over the Diocese of Egypt, Libya, and Pentapolis. And, after the Council of Chalcedon 451, the Bishop of Constantinople over the Diocese of Pontus, Asia, and Thrace. End quote. As you just saw, the Encyclopedia Britannica explains that, quote, the church structure was patterned on the administrative divisions of the Roman Empire. End quote. So this was nothing more than a redundant duplication of the structure of the Roman Empire, in the sphere of religion. It had nothing to do with Christ, or anything that he started. It was an entirely Gentile monarchy, from its beginning. The article goes on to explain, quote, controversy over the growth of major ecclesiastical centers contributed to the schism between East and West. Rome maintained that only apostolic sees, those originally established by apostles, had the right to become patriarchates. The East, however, always took for granted that primacies were based on such empirical factors as the economic and political importance of cities and countries. Constantinople, the new imperial capital and the ecclesiastical center of the East, had no claims to apostolicity, but new jurisdictional rights were bestowed upon it at Chalcedon, in 451, for the explicit reason that it was the residence of the emperor and the senate. End quote. This article mentions the Council of Chalcedon, in 451 AD, which we will also look at as part of the fulfillment of John's prophecy concerning the second beast, a little later. Just as the Roman Empire had an eastern and western division, so does this beast, or absolute monarchy. Under the Roman Empire, the western half was ruled in Rome, and the eastern half was ruled out of Antioch. The Roman religious monarchy followed the same pattern of an eastern and western division, but just as in the Civil Empire, the eastern half was subordinate to the western half, out of the city of Rome. And this remained so until an event, known as the Great Schism. Encyclopedia Britannica's article on the Great Schism, states, quote, East-West Schism, also called Schism of 1054, event that precipitated the final separation between the Eastern Christian churches led by the Patriarch of Constantinople, Michael Cerularius, and the Western Church led by Pope Leo IX. The mutual excommunications by the Pope and the Patriarch in 1054 became a watershed in church history. End quote. Britannica explains that they both were so full of themselves, they mutually excommunicated each other. Or in other words, mutually and infallibly, damned each other to eternal hell, along with all their followers. But in 1964, Pope John Paul VI and the Eastern Patriarch, Athanasius, decided it was bad for business, and mutually revoke the previous infallible excommunications that had been enforced for over 900 years, or nearly a millennia. So all those people had been infallibly damned to eternal hell, for nothing. Or of course, they never were, and it was all a lie. In which case meaning, everything else had been a lie too. But obviously, these two facts cannot simultaneously coexist, without invalidating one, or another. The Britannica article goes on to explain, quote, "The relation of the Byzantine Church to the Roman may be described as one of growing estrangement from the 5th to the 11th century. In the early church 3 bishops stood forth prominently, principally from the political eminence of the cities in which they ruled, the bishops of Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch." End quote. This article goes on to explain that, quote, "The theological genius of the East was different from that of the West. The Eastern theology had its roots in Greek philosophy, whereas a great deal of Western theology was based on Roman law. This gave rise to misunderstandings." End quote. So Britannica explains that, this misunderstanding was caused because in the West, Roman Catholic theology was based on an assimilation of Roman law, and in the East, it was based on an assimilation of Greek philosophy. And that is the problem with assimilation theology. It assimilates whatever is local to the region, and loses its original identity. So Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox theology was based on assimilation, and what it assimilated was contrary to the other. And, which is rather ironic because in neither case, was it based on the writing, and subsequent religious practices and tradition, of the actual apostles. Although both claimed to be apostolic, and it called everything else, other than itself, not apostolic. So the term, apostolic, was in fact, a form of religious opposite speak, or overcompensation, for the absence of the trait, as the real apostles in the New Testament, promulgated neither Roman law, which they considered unjust, nor Greek philosophy, which they considered the vain and empty imaginations of men. That is why the efforts of the Reformation were so important, which sought to bring the definition of Christianity back to its original historical form, as recorded in its primary apostolic source documentation, commonly known as the New Testament. In this article, Encyclopedia Britannica provides a map in the top left-hand corner of the article. Here is an enlargement of that map. As you can see on the map, Britannica outlines the historical regions of the two kingdoms. The Roman Catholic rule in the West, and the Eastern Orthodox rule in the East. John describes the rise of these two Gentile kingdoms as the first beast out of Rome, which he refers to as coming from the sea, and the second beast, out of the Holy Land, which he refers to as the land. The next map shows the same twofold division. Here are the two horns, that looks like a lamb but preaches as the dragon. And once again you see, the first beast, and the second beast. Unfortunately, the author of this map calls this Christianity, but John would have called this a map of Nicolaitanism, and the first and second beast of the Antichrist. So now you see why John prophesies two beasts, or kingdoms. A first beast or kingdom which is an absolute monarchy, and a second beast, or kingdom, which is subordinate to the first. But John is going to do much more than simply prophesy the coming existence of these two beasts, or kingdoms. He is going to get very specific in his descriptions about both of them, so that no neutral or objective honest reader could possibly mistake his prophecies for anything else in the world. The Eastern Orthodox Church is today considered a full participating member of the Roman Catholic Church. While rivalry may still exist between them on a local basis, the leaders of both divisions are in communion with one another since 1964, in an effort to restore their original political empire over all of Europe. But the Eastern Orthodox Church has its own unique history, which is very distinctive. The Eastern Orthodox Church is, still today, renowned for its historic creation and promotion of icons. But not just icons only. Icons which are routinely witnessed displaying signs of life, from spontaneously bleeding, to speaking to people and giving them instructions to do things. And it is also famous for one of the most historic and amazing miracles, performed every year, in the city of Jerusalem, called the Miracle of the Holy Fire. And amazingly, both of these things were prophesied by John in his descriptions of the second beast. The main points of identification in John's prophecy concerning the second beast is that it introduces icon worship, along with miracles used to deceive people into worshipping them. The Greek word used in John's text is icon, and is literally where we get the English word icon from. The second main identifier is the fraudulent miracle of fire. This is a picture of the fulfillment of John's prophecy of the first and second beast, the Roman papacy with the Eastern Patriarch. If you will notice in the picture, the Eastern Patriarch is literally covered with icons. In this next picture of the Roman papacy with the Eastern Patriarch, you will notice the icon embedded in his crown. And his staff is actually flanked with 2 fire-breathing dragons, as in the second beast. As we go through the historic fulfillment of John's second prophecy concerning the second beast, you will see how John's prophecies were literally fulfilled, in how these things came into being. And this is the true revelation found in the book which bears the name. But unfortunately, it is also the real revelation. The Counter-Reformation is willing to tell any kind of lie, in order to hide from the public. Counter-Reformationists rarely realize, the more they hide something, the more they actually draw attention to it. Consequently, if you watch their reactionary behavior, it is very easy to spot where they buried the treasure. Just as you saw in chapter 9 how they do, concerning John's reference to the Greco-Roman deity Apollo, mentioned in verse 11. When it comes to the name Sixtus, they do the same kinds of evasions and obfuscations that you saw in chapter 9, concerning John's reference to Apollo. Sixtus means sixth. And it is very easy to see that Sixtus means sixth, because the word six along with the T, as in sixth, is literally its first syllable, followed by the Latin suffix, us, pronounced, us. Thus the word, sixth, us. So you have to look very hard past the obvious syntax of the word itself, to come up with something other than what you clearly see. But they do. They will tell you that Sixtus means polished. And if you don't realize it means polished, it is simply because you are stupid. Because Sixtus means polished and has nothing to do with the number 6. So we cannot leave this section of verse 18's historical fulfillment without addressing the Counter-Reformation's claim that despite its obvious appearance, Sixtus doesn't mean sixth. The following survey on the name Sixtus can be found on www.ChristmasIsALie.com, in the library section, under the title, The Meaning of the Name Sixtus. A link will be provided in the description section of this video. The webpage will list reputable quotable source material along with links where it can be found. And the article will go into more graphic detail than can be covered in this short section in this video. You can also link the page to anyone who you run into that is claiming that Sixtus means polished, rather than sixth, to present a collection of information about that topic. The meaning of the name Sixtus is another example of something that really should not be controversial, because there is no real controversy about it. The controversy over its meaning has been falsely manufactured by people who simply do not want the truth about it heard or told, and thus their efforts at censorship and obfuscation. This effort is illustrated in the Wikipedia article on the name Sixtus. If you look it up today, you will see the very strange statement that, quote, not to be confused with Sextus. Sixtus was a Roman name, a corruption of the Greek name Xustos, meaning polished, and originally Latinized Xustus. In its Spanish form Sixto it is still used as a personal name. End quote. There are 5 explicit claims set forth in the above statement. 1. Sixtus has nothing to do with Sextus. 2. Because it was derived from Xustus. 3. Which was derived from Xustos. 4. Which meant polished. 5. Therefore, Sixtus means polished. And as you will see, all 5 of these implicit claims concerning the name Sixtus are either partially or completely false, and are misrepresented to the public. The fact this distortion of language in history was allowed to remain on Wikipedia as its article on this topic reflects very poorly on Wikipedia. And those who cite it are spreading a carefully crafted lie. This article in Wikipedia, however, was crafted to replace an original article. It is not the actual original article. The original article, as you are about to see, was true and accurate, and there was really nothing controversial about it for years, until it began to be cited. The original article said this, quote, Sixtus was a Roman name, originally meaning sixth child, but later being used for any child regardless of order. As you can see, it is almost an exact opposite of the article that now inhabits this space on Wikipedia. And even though the article that is now there is actually a false statement that is not even factually true, it is amplified all over the internet by numerous citations of it, even by sites that present themselves as reference sources. But as you will now see, the counter-reformation claim that Sixtus means polished is simply a bold-faced lie. The meaning of the name Sixtus, to be sixth, is clearly listed in scores of online name dictionaries. Nameberry.com states, quote, the name Sixtus is a boy's name of Latin origin meaning sixth born. End quote. ThinkBabyNames.com states, quote, Sixtus as a boy's name is of Latin origin, and the meaning of Sixtus is sixth. End quote. NameDoctor.com states, quote, this name derives from the Latin personal name Sextus, meaning the sixth born, which was originally given to the sixth child of the family. End quote. TheNamesDictionary.com states, quote, Sixtus means born sixth. End quote. BabyNamesFamily.com states, quote, Latin boy name Sixtus. It's a Latin name. This name means born sixth. End quote. Pragnology.com states, quote, meaning of Sixtus. Sixtus is a Latin name. The meaning is sixth. End quote. BabyNamesMeanings.net states, quote, meaning of name Sixtus. Latin, born sixth. End quote. Under similar names, it lists the name Sextus. TheBump.com states, quote, Sixtus as a boy's name is of Latin origin and the meaning of Sixtus is sixth. End quote. Namesofbaby.com states, quote, in Latin, the name Sixtus means, born sixth. End quote. Meaningofthename.com states, quote, meaning of the name Sixtus. One who was born as a sixth child. End quote. Babynology.com states, quote, Sixtus meaning, born sixth. End quote. AskACatholic.com, which subtitles its page with the statement, quote, a faithful resource for anyone seeking to learn the truth about the Church and her teaching, end quote, shows the question, posted by someone named Sixtus Umadu, who asks the site, quote, can you tell me the real meaning of the name Sixtus, because that is my name. I come from a strong Catholic family, and I was told, the name was given to me by my late grandfather during my birth. Marianne replied, quote, Hi Sixtus, well, it is Latin, and means sixth. It is also the name of one of the earliest popes. The name is in the ancient Roman Eucharist prayer of the Mass. End quote. Below that answer, on that same page, someone named Mike replies, quote, I just wanted to add to my colleague's answer. There have been 5 popes who have taken the name Sixtus. Why Sixtus? Well, it appears that Sixtus I was the 6th successor to St. Peter. The other popes probably took the name Sixtus, in honor of the first Sixtus, one of their predecessors. End quote. And this article from July 5, 2017, in The Guardian, reported that Britain's Conservative Catholic Member of Parliament, Jacob Rees-Mogg, named his 6th child, Sixtus, in keeping with the tradition of the name. All this is not mistaken. This is the actual meaning of the name Sixtus, which has nothing to do with polished. Jacob Rees-Mogg did not name his child Sixtus because he was polished. He named him Sixtus because he was the 6th child. Next, we will look at the origin of the name Sixtus. And once again, even in its etymology, we find it means sixth. The Catholic website, popehistory.com, gives the Catholic explanation of the origin of this name Sixtus as well. Quote, Pope Saint Sixtus I was a Roman man and the 7th leader of the Church. He was the first pope to choose the Sixtus name, though 5 other men would later choose his name. Sixtus I also later became a saint in the Catholic Church. Born as Sixtus, Pope Sixtus I would also use the Sixtus name during his time before joining the Church. Roman by birth, he began helping the Church at a young age. The Catholic Church identifies Pope Sixtus I as a saint. He was born circa 42 and known as both Sixtus and Sixtus in his early years. Early church records list his name as Sixtus and give the same name to the next 2 popes who used the Sixtus name. Some believe that he used the name Sixtus during his papacy and that the Church gave him the Sixtus name as he was the 6th pope after Peter. Sixtus means 6th. PopeHistory.com reports that his birth name was Sixtus, and after becoming pope, he chose Sixtus as his papal name. PopeHistory.com also reports that some believe it was later attributed to him by the Roman Catholic Church because he had been the 6th alleged pope after Peter, whom they fictitiously count as their first pope. But that is an incredibly bizarre name to give a pope, considering they had in their possession a prophecy from John in the book of Revelation. Someone by the name of 3 Sixes would rise to power in Rome and be John's prophesied Antichrist. A study on the etymology of the name Sixtus also reveals it means 6th. To understand the etymology of the name, historically, it must be traced across several different languages. From English to Spanish to Italian and to Latin and Greek, because the name Sixtus appears in all these different languages with spelling variants created by the different languages. In English, German and Latin, the name Sixtus remains unchanged and continued forward as a spelling variant of Sextus. But in Italian and Spanish, it became Sesto for Sextus, and Sisto for Sixtus. But these were spelling variants for the same name. Sisto becoming famous for its use in naming the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, which means pertaining to Sixtus. This etymology is displayed in graphical form on the website babynamespedia.com. As you can see from the graphical etymology, Sixtus is shown in the yellow circle at the top. To the right of the yellow circle, and also above the yellow circle, is its origin in Latin, which is also shown to be a spelling variant of Sextus just below, also becoming Sesto and Sisto in Italian, also as a spelling variant from Sextus in Latin. And also the origin of the feminine version in Italian and Spanish of Sexta or Sixta, and also Sesta and Sista, all derived from Sixtus, which babynamespedia.com also report as a spelling variant of Sextus. This etymology is also reported by Ancestry.com for the family name Six. Quote, 6 name meaning. French and German from a personal name, Latin Sixtus, a variant of Sextus, 6th, born. Born by various saints and popes in the early centuries of the Christian era, and subsequently adopted in their honor. End quote. And the same etymology is reported by Ancestry.com for the family name of Sisto, as used in the naming of the Sistine Chapel. Quote, Italian. Mainly southern. From the personal name, Sisto, a variant of Sesto. Latin Sixtus, Sextus, meaning 6th, born. End quote. Ancestry.com reports its source as the Dictionary of American Family Names published by Oxford Press in 2013. The website FamilyEducation.com also reports under the name Sixtus, under the title of Family Name Origins and Meaning that, quote, French and German. From a personal name, Latin Sixtus, a variant of Sextus, 6th born. End quote. The website, wordreference.com, under its article on the name Sistine, as in the Sistine Chapel, gives the etymology for the word as being derived from Sixtus, and Sixtus being a spelling variant of Sextus. Quote, Sistine. Definition number 1. Of, or pertaining to any pope named Sixtus. Also Sixtin. Etymology. Latin Sextus. Medieval Latin Sixtus. Special use of Sextus 6th. Italian Sistino, pertaining to Sisto, a man's name. End quote. Wordreference.com states the name Sixtus is medieval Latin and means 6th. Wordreference.com also states it is a variant spelling of the original Latin name Sextus. The website wordnick.com, under its article on the name Sistine, as in the Sistine Chapel, gives the etymology for the word Sistine as follows, quote, Italian Sistino, from New Latin Sixtinus, from medieval Latin Sixtus, the name of several popes, from Latin Sixtus, Roman praenomen, from Sixtus, sixth. End quote. And once again, the American Heritage Dictionary repeats this very same etymology under its article on the name Sistine, as in the Sistine Chapel, stating, quote, Italian Sistino, from New Latin Sixtinus, from medieval Latin Sixtus, the name of several popes, from Latin Sextus, Roman praenomen, from Sextus, sixth. End quote. The online etymology dictionary reports, under its etymology of the name Sistine, that quote, Sistine. Adjective. 1769. Literally, pertaining to Pope Sixtus, from Italian, Sistino, from Sixtus, the name of 5 popes, from Latin Sextus, sixth. End quote. So you see, when counter-reformationists plaster the word polished on the internet as the meaning of the name Sixtus, and make the ridiculous statement that it is not to be confused with the Roman praenomen Sextus, which is literally stated verbatim in the actual etymology of the word, they are simply bold-faced lying to the public, in order to hide the truth. The name Sextus, the Old Latin version, was written as Sixtus in medieval Latin, and Sisto, as in the Sistine Chapel. Later in Italian it's all the same name, with the same meaning, the ordinal number, sixth, as in the meaning of sixth born. And as such, especially given the rest of the prophecies in Revelation chapter 13, this fulfilled John's prophecy concerning the coming of a man by the name of 3 sixes, written out 666. To be enumerated, not calculated. Sixtus really does mean sixth. Verse 11 reads as follows, quote, And I saw another beast arise out of the land, having 2 horns like a lamb, but preaching as a dragon. End quote. As noted previously, this prophecy states a second monarchy will arise out of the Holy Land that will have the appearance of a lamb, meaning Christianity, but it will preach like the dragon, meaning Imperial Rome. It will have the appearance of Christianity, but it will preach the Roman Empire. And we know from the verses that follow next, John is describing the rise of the Eastern Patriarch, which was originally part of the Roman Church, in the East, prior to the Great Schism in 1054 AD. And as previously covered, the rise of the Eastern Patriarch began with the Council of Nicaea, and was codified at the Council of Ephesus. And as you will see when we get to verse 18, that was not all that came out of the Council of Ephesus. But the rise of the Eastern Patriarch began simultaneously in 312 AD with the rise of Constantine as the Roman Caesar. The western half of the empire was given the Roman papacy, the eastern half was given the Eastern Patriarch. And this second prophecy is a description of the Eastern monarchy. Our historical timeline begins in the year 314. The feast day for Saint Macarius is March the 10th, in honor of his assistance in discovery of the cross. On March the 10th, 314, at sunrise, which is when Easter services are held, Aries along with Cetus and the 2 horns are seen in the sky. Verse 12 reads as follows, quote, And the authority of the former beast he does, all in the face of him, and makes the residents of the land, to reverence the former beast whose stroke of death was adored. End quote. In verse 12 John tells us that the authority of the second beast grows out of the authority of the first beast, and is an extension of him, just as was the eastern and western halves of the Roman Empire, upon which it was patterned. Secondly, John tells us that this second beast causes the residents of the land, a reference to Jerusalem, to adore the stroke of his death. As discussed earlier, that was a reference to the adoration of the crucifixion, which was in fact instigated by Macarius the Bishop of Jerusalem. Our historical timeline date for this text is the year 335 AD, and as was also previously discussed, the sign in the heavens, for this text, was the face of the constellation Aquarius. As John writes, it is done in the face of him. What happened in the year 335 AD? When Bishop Macarius accompanied Emperor Constantine's mother back to Rome to present Constantine with a fragment of wood from the alleged cross discovered by them in Jerusalem. the ritual of the adoration of the cross became part of Rome's ecclesiastical ritual. While there, Constantine ordered the building of a cathedral to mark the discovery of the cross. This cathedral came to be known as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. On May 3, 335 AD, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was dedicated, and on that very day, the face of Aquarius ascended over the eastern horizon, at the very beginning of the day. And John's prophecy in verse 12 was dramatically fulfilled in history, precisely as he had prophesied. Verse 13 reads as follows, quote, "And he does great miracles and makes fire come down from heaven in the land, in the sight of men." End quote. In this verse, we see one of John's two signature prophecies that identifies the second beast. The first of these two, fire from heaven, is obviously a very hard sign to accidentally miss. You have to really want to not see it in order to miss it. On our historical timeline we have the year 385 AD, and again, our sign in the heaven was the face of the constellation Aquarius. So what happened in the year 385 AD? One of the earliest and perhaps first recorded instance of what is described as a major miracle, which occurs every year in Jerusalem, happened at Easter, on April the 14th, 385 AD. It is known as the miracle of the Holy Fire in Jerusalem, and it is attributed to the Eastern Patriarch. Precisely as John prophesied would happen. And once again, on the very same day of April 14th, the face of Aquarius is once again looking over the horizon, precisely as the new day emerges. When this miracle is pointed to as a fulfillment of this prophecy, counter-reformationists, especially of the Western persuasion, will argue that that miracle doesn't count, because it is a fraud, or, in other words, it is not real. But that is precisely what John states in the next verse. It is a fraudulent miracle. So not only did the fire from heaven occur, but even the prophesied element of it being a fraud, was accurate in John's prophecy as well. The miracle of the Holy Fire is called precisely that, because the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is also responsible for its occurrence, has always called it miraculous fire from heaven. Just as chapter 13 verse 13 reads in Revelation. Verse 14 reads as follows, quote, "And he deceives the residents of the land through the miracle that he gives to them in the face of the beast, preaching to the residents of the land, make an icon of the beast, that had the stroke of the sword and lived." End quote. In verse 14, John clarifies to the reader that the miracle is fraudulent, and is being used to deceive people. But in verse 14, he introduces the second major prophetic sign that identifies the second beast, and that is icon worship. And as everyone familiar with religious studies fully knows, the Eastern Orthodox Church is famous for its promotion of icon worship. Which is precisely what John is prophesying here, in verse 14. And as mentioned in the previous video, John switches expression in this language. Previously, he called the false crucifixion the stroke of his death, but here he changes his language and refers to the icon of the beast as having had the stroke of a sword and did live. Why did John do that? Once again, John was writing an insult. John was stating this icon was not an icon of Christ at all. It was an icon of themselves. Why? Because Constantine, the Roman Caesar, was the one who had the stroke of the sword, and did live. And John's insult here was not without historical basis. Not only was Constantine wounded with a sword, in the Battle of Adrianople, on July 3, 324 AD, and did live. Historians have noted the very odd fact, that the earliest icons of Christ, all looked like they had the face of Constantine, himself. So John's prophetic criticism, that these icons were about the Roman Caesar, and not Christ, had a very factual basis, in real history, precisely as he had prophesied. Verse 15 reads as follows, quote, "And he gave of himself a powerful spirit to the icon of the beast, so that the icon of the beast even speaks, and he makes whoever does not reverence the icon of the beast, to be put to death." End quote. In verse 15, John writes that the second beast or Eastern religious leader gives a spirit to the icon, so that people even hear it speak. The KJV translates this verse as, quote, giving life to the image, end quote, and while the idea is certainly present in this text, the word is spirit, but implying life. The second unmistakable prophetic sign about the second beast is that it has icons, which come to life, and which people hear speak to them. The second sign was obviously fulfilled in history. Even into our very own day, the other miracle that is associated with the miracle of the holy fire, and occurs at the same time this ritual is performed, is that icons come to life, and both bleed, cry and speak to people. Right out of the pages of Revelation chapter 13 verse 15. Our historical time frame is the year 394 AD, and the astronomical signs in the heaven consisted once again of Aries and Cetus, the same beast. This was the spirit the second beast was imbuing into his icons, which would bring them life. So what happened in 394 AD? The miracle of the holy fire is performed at Easter as part of the rejection of the Passover meal commanded by Christ. It draws attention to icon worship promoted by the Eastern religious figure John is calling the second beast, or monarchy. On Easter, April 10, 394 AD, sunrise was located right in the middle of Aries and Cetus, exactly on the horizon, at the 6th hour, the 6th minute and the 6th second of the day. In other words, at exactly 6 minutes and 6 seconds past 6 o'clock. Verse 16 reads as follows, quote, and he makes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free and the slave, to receive his mark upon their right forehand or upon their forehead. End quote. We have covered the grammatical elements of this text in our previous video. This is the text that introduces the famous mark of the beast. John says that all kinds of people, in the qualitative use of the Greek, will take the mark. Small, great, rich and poor, free and slave. Yes, the text also mentions slaves, as a class of people, when the mark is given. Our historical timeline for this text is the year 407 AD, when slaves actually were a class of people in society, just as the text suggests. And the astronomical sign in the heavens for the mark of the beast was Shola, the tail star of the constellation Scorpio. So what happened in the year 407 AD? As we have discussed previously, the ash mark taken from the Azazel goat was given to people at the time of Lent, just as it is today. Lent during the year 407 AD was on March 5th. When we look into the heavens over the city of Jerusalem, on March 5th 407 AD, amazingly, we see the tail of Scorpio, positioned exactly on the eastern horizon, as March 5th, and Lent begins. Verse 17 reads as follows, quote, and no one is allowed to market or trade, if they do not have the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. End quote. As we covered also in the previous video, this is the often confused text, promoted as the claim that the mark will control all buying and selling, which in fact, the text says no such thing. There are 3 conditions preset, all separated by the word, or, meaning it could be any one of the 3 conditions. So it emphatically demonstrates the mark is not controlling anything, because 2 of the 3 conditions mentioned in the text, or a full 63% of those mentioned, do not involve the mark at all. The buying and selling, or more accurately market and trading, are mentioned here as being regulated based on religious law. Our historical time frame for this text is the year 429 AD, and the astronomical signs in the heavens are Shala in the tail of Scorpio, for the mark, and Libra, the scales, for buying and selling. So what happened in the year 429 AD? On March 26, 429 AD, one of the most monumental legal events occurred in the history of Western civilization. A commission was established by Emperor Theodosius II to compile all the edicts, decrees and orders for the new Christian empire, since the time of Constantine. This codification of law became known as the Theodosian Codex. One of the provisions included in the Theodosian Codex had been passed in the year 407 AD, which we just looked at on our historical timeline. The edict declared that heresy was to be seen as a public crime, detrimental to all. Heretics, therefore, would not be permitted to give gifts, make contracts, or buy and sell. The citation for this law was Section 16, Paragraph 5, Article 40. The very day this commission was convened, directly overhead in the sky, as the first hour of the day emerged, the sign of Libra, for buying and selling, was in the heavens, and directly underneath Libra for buying and selling, was the constellation Scorpio, with its tail star, Shala, set on the very horizon. And thus, John's prophecy was fulfilled, precisely as he had prophesied, complete, with the signs in the heavens. Verse 18 reads as follows, quote, "In this is wisdom. The one that has understanding will use parables to enumerate the number of the beast. It is the number of a man. And his number is 666. End quote. And now we get to John's final text in chapter 13, which is his grand finale, summary prophecy, concerning the entire chapter, and his two prophecies concerning the first and second beast, or the coming of the two Roman monarchies. As we have pointed out, the text does not say calculate, it says to enumerate, and enumerate means to count in order, as on a list. And John gives us a set of astronomical values in the text, the planet Jupiter, and the planet Saturn, and the constellation Aquarius. And on our historical timeline we have the year 432 AD. As you know by now, when John cites the name as a number, with 3 sixes, people in his day would have been completely familiar with the Roman naming convention of taking numbers for their names. 3 sixes would have been fairly easy to count, as in 1, 2, 3, 6 1, 6 2, and 6 3. And that is precisely what his prophecy was. And counter-reformationists are fully aware of this fact. That is why they lie so frequently concerning the name Sixtus. They are hiding something, precisely because they know there is something they need to hide. So what happened in the year 432 AD? In the year 115 AD, a pope by the name Sixtus took the name Sixtus, or was given the name Sixtus, because he was said to be the sixth pope from Peter. This Pope Sixtus became a saint and a martyr for the Catholic Church supposedly, and in the Catholic tradition of taking the names of martyrs and saints, in the year 257 AD, a second pope took the name Sixtus. This was Sixtus II, as in Sixtus number 2. 2 sixes. But in the year 432, a third pope came to power, whose name was Sixtus. This time, this pope became Pope Sixtus III, or in other words, 6-3, as in John's prophecy of 666. He was coronated pope on July 31, 432 AD. Overhead, in the skies of the city of Rome, the evening before, as July 30th, became July 31st, on the eastern horizon, all three of John's prophetic signs appeared in the first hour of the day. Both Jupiter and Saturn had aligned, in the very constellation of Aquarius, the man. And contrary to what counter-reformationists will try to perpetuate on the internet, not only was Pope Sixtus III, or Pope 666, as biblical prophecy would describe him, really named 6, his tenure as pope was not uneventful. In fact, some of the most significant changes in the world occurred under his pontificate. Pope Sixtus III stated that all religious freedom was to be condemned. And he advocated something called the Church Militant, which, as it sounds, is the attitude of militancy concerning religion. He is referred to by some Catholic scholars as the first pope to exercise full papal power. Secondly, he also officiated the first official Christmas at the Vatican, at the shrine of the Lupercal, which means the shrine of the wolf, thus incorporating Christmas into the official ecclesiastical liturgy of the Catholic Church, and merging Rome's worship of the Son with Rome's defension of Christ, so that they would be indistinguishable. And the third momentous thing that Pope Sixtus III did, was that he authorized the creation of Christian idols, to be incorporated into Christmas worship. The idols are popularly called nativity scenes. Among Catholics they are frequently kissed and prayed to, so pretending they are not idols, is simply denial. And so, John's prophecies, complete with his signs in the heavens, were fulfilled in history. That is also why, the image, the icon, and the idol, worshipped on December 25th, in Rome, is not Christ. It is the worship of the image of the beast. Precisely as John warned the world in the book of Revelation. If you want to go to the same heaven that John is now in, you will have to confess the truth about the false Christ, worshipped by pseudo-Christians, on December 25th. It never died for your sins. And it cannot save you. You have seen, in the examination of the historical fulfillment of John's second prophecy, from chapter 13, verse 11, to verse 18, that all the prophecies concerning the coming of the second beast, the image of the beast, the mark of the beast and 666, have all been definitively fulfilled in history, along with John's astronomical dating, for verification. In verse 11 and 12, you saw that the second beast, or monarchy, which arises out of the land, was the rise of the Eastern Patriarch, which had 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke as a dragon, literally bearing the sign of 2 dragons, on his scepter. You saw that verse 13 was fulfilled in the miracle of the holy fire, performed every year at Easter in Jerusalem by the Eastern Patriarch. In verse 14, you saw that it was the Eastern Patriarch who introduced the practice of icon worship and the making of icons of Rome's false Christ. In verse 15, you saw that these icons come to life, they bleed and they speak to people, precisely as John prophesied. In verse 16, you saw that John's prophesied mark on the forehead or right forehand occurred in history, and in verse 17, you saw that his prophecy that this Roman monarchy would control buying and selling came to pass, precisely as he foretold it would, to the extent it led to the complete extermination of the Jewish family, blood relatives, of Christ, on the earth. And in verse 18, you saw that John's prophecy concerning 666 was fulfilled in the coming of 3 popes by the name of Sixtus I, Sixtus II and Sixtus III. And you saw that the Counter-Reformation intentionally misinforms and deceives the public about the recognition of this event, and even the meaning of the name Sixtus itself, in order to hide this event in plain sight. The implications of this truth are both profound and earth-shaking. And that is precisely why the truth about this chapter remains intentionally hidden from the public at large. If Pope Sixtus III was in fact the prophesied 666 of the Book of Revelation, then it means that billions of people on earth are right now following the Antichrist, worshipping his image, and taking his mark. And unfortunately, at least according to the Apostle John, they will also not be saved by Christ, because they have replaced him with something that is not him. They have put their faith in a lie that was crafted by the Roman Empire from its beginning to be a replacement of him. And it will not save you. And this fact transcends even simply Roman Catholicism. That concludes our examination of Revelation chapter 13. In the next video, we will begin the examination of Revelation 14, which will cover the Lamb and the 144,000, the message of the 3 angels, and the harvest of the earth, and what these texts are really telling us, straight, unfiltered and uncensored, from the original language, in the Textus Receptus. Thank you for watching.